gun charging Dave Chappelle, violence is not the answer. And we should try our best to never resort to violence. However, my
If you're looking for a legitimate tax
is the fact that maybe instead of completely suppressing our aggression, how about releasing it in a controlled and safe setting where no one gets hurt, including yourself? And I think this is becoming a lost narrative, especially in today's world where we praise safety overall, sensitivity overall, emotions overall, and to never hurt anybody regardless of whatever. Yes, I believe that too. I don't think anybody should get hurt. I don't think anybody should be physically harmed or even emotionally harmed. But chances are, if you're a human being on Earth and you're a life form that's a mammal and a creature with biological urges, you have the propensity to cause violence and to cause aggression amongst yourself and other people. And you can't ignore that. We can't ignore the fact that everybody has a sense of violence deep within their subconscious and even biological programming. And what I find funny is that the people that generally are supposed to be anti-violence and not supposed to be advocating violence end up being the ones that commit violence. And if they're not committing physical violence, they're probably one of the most passive-aggressive motherfuckers I ever seen, bruh. I mean, you ever talk to the people that would just be like, I would never hurt a fly, but you know, I just feel like that dress doesn't work for you? Everybody has a propensity for violence. And if it doesn't come out, whether physically in a safe place, verbally in a safe place, it comes out in a ton of other ways. And in a more domestic sense, it comes out as like pettiness, passive aggression, judging, self-harm, all those types of things. I mean, the amount of bullying that occurs on social media, especially by the people who claim that they're here to be inclusive and accepting and love for all, they're the ones that are probably the most guilty of direct and overt bullying online, because that aggression is somewhere there and it's not being let out. Within the current cultural circumstances, it's hard to find within any of the mediums a type of art form that allows people to safely access a catharsis of violence and aggression. I mean, there are things in more niche areas, but in the current cultural mainstream narrative, there isn't anything that allows people to tap in those primal urges safely. Only because within my own personal experience, I never realized how much aggression I was actually holding within myself that didn't come out as like abuse to others, but really explosive emotional episodes that I would almost just direct at myself. And I would go through really crazy bouts of like rage and depression and anxiety that was so overwhelming, but I would only aim it at myself. And it got to a point where I realized, like, this is not healthy. I really need to figure out a way to release these things somehow. And the first thing that came about was actually boxing. I thought back to when I was maybe like 11, 13 years old and I was obsessed with, you know, certain types of action films, martial arts films. I was really actually into pro wrestling, which I've been revisiting the last few weeks, and it's fucking awesome. Lucha Underground, man, Hurricane Ranas, power bombs left and right. It was, when I look at pro wrestling, it's kind of like this acted out gladiatorial fight for survival, and it's not real. Most people these days prefer MMA, UFC, boxing, Muay Thai, whatever else, and I like those things too, but within pro wrestling, it's not real violence, it's simulated violence, except it has that gladiatorial edge to it where everybody gets to overtly release and have that cathartic moment of aggression and screaming at your opponent type of a thing. And I think people do that with sports as well. And nowadays, it's politics. And I'm wondering if this spillage into certain art forms like stand-up comedy or even politics is the result of a deeply repressed primal urge. To be honest, like, I haven't really been into any shows, film, music of anything in the last like 5 to 6 years. I've been revisiting the early 2000s, which had this explosion of science fiction action films or just action films in general. I mean, we have John Wick now, but I look at the action films before and god damn, are they just fucking badass, man. It was so over the top and most likely overdone, especially within the 90s, 2000s, around that area. Everything was like a cool dude with an explosion in the background doing backflips and throwing katanas and blowing up people with double wielding machine guns and shit. It was really over the top, but there is a sense of catharsis that comes with that simulated release of aggression. It doesn't have to be senseless violence. Like one of my favorite shows before it got all wonky was actually The Walking Dead, where the violence and the death in the show actually brought out the humanity of the characters and really explored the depth of the human condition through that violence. This is going to come off like I'm advocating violence. I'm not advocating violence. I'm more so thinking about the repercussions of repressing aggression, a deeply rooted human primal urge to the point where it naturally just has to come out in ways that are completely uncalled for. If you think about it, it's absolutely ridiculous. At a stand-up comedy show is now where the violence ensues. That's insane. I get if you go to like a mosh pit or a rap show and a fight breaks out, but even so, fights rarely break out at mosh pits. You know why? Because it is a controlled release of aggression. If you go to a metal show or a punk show, everybody has set rules and set standards, and no one is allowed to just deck someone in the face. You can't bring one of these there. And it's funny because if you actually meet a metalhead or a punk, they're oftentimes really down to earth and pretty chill. It's because all of that stuff gets released through the art and the music and the shows. And stand-up comedy is supposed to be one of those mediums and one of those places where you can actually have that catharsis. You can complain about things that drive you crazy, but if it's done in a funny way, you can make other people laugh and you can make